Hello, good morning or good afternoon or whatever time zone you're in, everybody. This is the second webinar in the series that we're doing with CostPerform. Remember last time we talked about shared service costing, and out of that webinar we got a lot of questions, and we see that also, of course, in all the leads that we're getting, is to be a little bit more specific on the IT component of the shared service center. So today I'm joined, my name is Sander den Hartog, I'm the CEO of CostPerform, and I'm joined today by Mahmoud Ismawi. Maybe you can introduce yourself a little bit.
Hi, thank you, Sander. I'm Mahmoud Ismawi, the director at On Point Advisory, and we support CostPerform clients globally to implement, amongst many things, TBM and ITFM cost models.
Yeah, and that is actually a very good bridge. Thank you very much. We're going to talk about TBM, but one of the things that I get asked and we get asked all the time is TBM, ITFM, what's the difference, IT cost allocation? Well, in general, or sometimes FinOps, IT FinOps, things that come by. We'll do a little bit of like definition hustling later on. But then again, don't worry too much about it. At the end of the day, it's all about getting transparency in your IT costing, and what the TBM framework, that's how I would phrase it, as a framework that they've set, they've really helped to give a little bit of structure around it. And that is something that we see in the market has been, very helpful. But at the end of the day, of trying to get your transparency in cost, comes down to the nitty-gritty modeling of your cost, and that's where we're good at. Anyway, as always, you can ask questions right throughout the whole conversation that I'm going to have with Mahmoud and that I'm going to present in the chat. We try to answer them as quickly as we can, but sometimes it will be a little bit of a delay because of the number of questions that we get. But feel free to ask us during the time, and we'll make sure that all questions get answered. Before we start into a little bit of a discussion and also on a few clients, I would like to take you through a few slides that I have. We've made our introduction. I'm going to explain a little bit the TBM framework, and then we'll get into a discussion. The TBM framework. There is a TBM Council that is a not-for-profit organization, but actually very much liaised to one of our colleague companies, Aptio, and the TBM Council did a very good job in really structuring the thinking around this IT costing. And what I'd like to take you through is a few of those slides from the TBM Council that really help to understand where it all comes down. What they are trying to do, they are trying to achieve better conversations between the CFO and the CIO, because in the old days, when it was all around budgeting, things that you would get is, why is it another 10% extra of IT cost? Or why is it 10 million extra of IT cost? Or even in the large situations, 1 billion extra of IT cost. And then the IT guy, the CIO, would say, that's because of all the demands that we have from the business. Of course we have to expand, or of course we have to make sure that we're more agile. That's why we're spending it. And at the end of the day, there would be a little bit of back and forth, and they would say, okay, I only grant your 70% for the next year's budget. What they try to achieve with the TBM framework is to really get value conversations. And the idea that they have around IT is that IT should be repositioned. That's why it is the bottom part of this slide, positioning for value and be continuously improving. That is what the whole role of IT is, and not only improving itself, but also the business. And cornered by that is it has to deliver value for money, it has to be shaping the business demand, and do that in a transparent way, which is planned and governed. And in that whole circle, they have like the value conversations that are aligned around running the business and changing the business. Well, if we zoom a little bit in, what are those value conversations? Well, I like the bottom blocks probably the best, is where they say, when we talk about running a business, it is about proving two major points. One point is, we deliver the right performance for the best possible price. And that's all you can ask from an IT department. You want to make sure that you are not going down the block, down the street, where you can say, I can have the same service for a best price. No, you have to really prove that you are the one that's delivering the best performance. When it comes to another key point is that you have to make sure that you're spending your resources, because as always, there's a limited amount of resources. When it comes to running the business, you want to make sure that you're spending your resources to get your biggest return possible for the business. So not so much only for IT, but for the business itself. And then on the change the business side, what I really like is that they've broken it down to what is innovation and what is agility. So how quick can I respond? And the things that you try to prove is that you're maximizing your innovation dollars, and at the other side, that you're really improving the speed in which our IT, but also the business can respond to changing markets. And that is the 4 value conversations that you would like to be able to be having between your business and IT, and you would need a very part of like transparent IT modeling and IT costing for that. So what have they further broke that down? What are the kind of KPIs that you would be looking at to really have those conversation? Well, the cost for performance is probably the easiest one, where you just calculate relatively old-fashioned, but at least from cost per modeling perspective, old-fashioned unit cost versus the target for that unit cost, SLA performance, all these kind of elements that we currently see also when you are having these contracts between the business and your IT department. When it comes a little bit more to the right-hand side of this slide, is it's a little bit more innovative when it comes to metrics. When you see TCO, for the ones that don't know that, that's the total cost of ownership, and then the total cost of ownership for a corporate outcome. So say, for example, that your corporate outcome, if you're in a banking situation, is to better serve the mortgage portfolio, or to be able to have a higher number of people onboarding on your savings platform, then that corporate outcome, you should have a complete total cost of ownership, including all your IT part of it. But then you have to make sure that somehow you can relate your IT cost to that specific savings account or to that specific mortgage portfolio. And that's what is meant by a business-aligned portfolio. When it comes to investment in innovation, that's once again a little bit easier, because if you would label all your costs and all your activities right, you could quickly make KPIs like running the business versus changing the business. You could look at projects on time, on spec, and on budget. That's like really the good old project management part of it. But you also want to know investment by value category. So you have to define your categories where you're adding value and see where am I investing to make sure that you're investing in the right innovative things. And then agility, one of the things that I always like to see what I see happening is in this whole agility part with the whole moving to cloud. Yeah. It's a lot easier to get more agile, because everything that you first off had as a very fixed base, like your whole iron, your infrastructure, now all of a sudden can be very agile, because you can either turn it off at the same time. So that really helps in your enterprise agility. So things like that, how many of my services am I actually delivering through a cloud portfolio, and are therefore agile or not? Well, these are some of the KPIs. We see none of our clients, I'll be honest, using all of these KPIs, but they're all on a journey to get a little bit to this level. From those KPIs, how do you get there? And this is much more up for those of you who are familiar with cost modeling, up our alley, is where you try to model your cost pools. So somewhere out of your GLs, you would map all your costs towards different cost pools, and you try to figure out a way to get that all the way to your business units, to your business architect, to your customer and partners. And you do that through towers and solutions. Those are like super specific TBM names, but you could also replace them by resources, processes, activities. That doesn't really matter. However, I'll have to applaud the TBM Council a little bit for this. They have, and that's maybe also a good starting point for our discussion, what they have done, they have actually really mapped the whole taxonomy, so this whole model out, and there's I think a 60, 70 page document that describes like every little rectangular box on what should be in there and what shouldn't be in there. And that is on the one hand super cool, super nice, because you have a very good starting point. On the other hand, you're a little bit stuck in a fixed model. And maybe that's where I'd like to ask Mahmoud. The first question is, that is a little bit the things that we hear as a downside from the TBM as it being very much fixed. If you would compare that to ITFM and to take that level a little bit up again from what are the definitions, how would you look at that?
Sure, thank you, Sander. So it's a very good question, and actually TBM, as you said, is a framework, it's a taxonomy which prescribes how you should allocate. Amongst many things, one of the things it does is it prescribes how you should allocate your IT costs. But I think fundamentally, it's the objective is to ensure that the value of IT is communicated within the organization. And how you do that is completely up to you. So whereas TBM is very prescriptive and provides a good kind of mechanism and something you can benchmark as well. That's a good thing about standardization. ITFM allows you a little bit more flexibility. But ultimately, Sander, as you said, it comes down to what you want to do. And there's only three things you really need to do to build a good cost model. One is, what do we spend on? So what are the people we spend on? What are the applications we spend on? What are the things we buy? How do we spend it? Do we spend it on monitoring, security, application development? And why do we spend it? We spend it for services, to deliver these services to our customers internally or our other stakeholders. So those are the three sort of bits of components or of information that you need to build a good cost model.
And Mahmoud, you have been building those cost models with quite some clients. It's also clients that have actually embarked on the TBM journey, but then came a little bit back of it to make it a little bit more flexible. Could you tell us a little bit on how that whole process was like to get from the general ledger, where it's like super granular, almost on an invoice level, to get down to the like products and services that the IT department is delivering?
I think one common challenge I always see is when a project like this is embarked on, people want to go kind of full throttle. So they say, okay, we want to build, the full end-to-end TBM model, and it kind of turns into a massive data integration piece if you're not too careful. Again, losing sight of your key objectives. So the project ends up becoming too big. There's usually overspend on the budget to implement such a program. And actually, what we find is after a while, after kind of trying to implement the TBM taxonomy to the letter, clients tend to kind of grasp what the TBM taxonomy is trying to do and cater that to their needs, and build a cost model that better fits their objectives.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I'm trying to challenge you a little bit here. I can imagine that your story is probably true for somewhat a smaller enterprise, but I know that you have done, for example, and I'm happy to share the name, is British Telecom. That's a billions and billions in spend of IT. I can imagine that for them, having all this data connection elements was a serious issue. How much time did it still took you to get to numbers that they were able to act upon?
So I think it's about how well the data is organized, and a typical implementation would take anything from 3 to 6 months if the data is ready, and that's with building a good cost model and getting outcomes that they can actually act upon, whether it's unit metrics or whether it's showback, or even setting a chargeback mechanism. Are we going to charge based on unit costs? Are we going to charge based on fixed with under or over recovery? So a lot of decisions need to be made, but you can do it fairly quickly with the right direction.
As an example of those decisions, like you say, under and over recovery, the big question is, what do we see IT like? Is it a cost center or is it a profit center? Is it allowed to be making a profit or a loss? And what do we do with the loss later on in the whole cascading down the organization? Interesting. So what you're saying is that the actual building and the actual connection is just a part of the time, but the throughput time sometimes sometimes really depends upon the decisions that have to be made.
100%. That is the key value of a project like this. And back to your original question, that's where a lot of the time implementations would go wrong, because it turns into a massive connectivity exercise. And yeah, we all know data is not perfect. So that's the one key misconception that we need to get over.
What would be your recommendation in the knowing this? If people want to start with TBM, ITFM, and embark on the journey, what would be your recommendation on how to embark on that journey to make sure that they don't fall into that trap?
Yeah, I think you need a strong starting point, in the sense that, okay, we spoke about having the objective, but the other thing is to have the right team dedicated in place, and the third thing is to get the right kind of financial data to plug in, get some operational metrics, not all of them. So start to identify these things early on. So the CMDB that you would potentially connect to, and lastly, start changing the conversation, which I think takes a bit of leadership around how IT spend should be seen. So that the CIOs need to take a big step in this, and to kind of communicate the project or the initiative internally. So those are the key things I would say. If you really want to embark on this journey, that's how you do it. And then once you've done that, then the tool or the solution becomes very important, because you want to be able to automate this. You want to be able to publish these reports on time. You want your ITFM team or your cost management team to be able to analyze reports, because once you issue a number, you'll have 10 or 20 more questions. So if you have an Excel solution in place, we all know that could be...
your agility to answer those questions is out of the window.
Exactly.
And that's what we were aiming for before. Hey, without trying to lead your answers a little bit, I do hear a little bit of a conflict, because I do hear you're saying, hey, please try not to be 100% right, but just get started and be like 80-85% right in the beginning. But at the same time, I also hear you're saying but you'll be sure that you'll get some answers back. So you probably have to redo some of your numbers there. Yeah. How do you juggle with that, like not trying to be precise, because otherwise you'll be stuck forever in your project. Yeah. But at the same time, you don't want to have to change the numbers all the time. Yeah.
Well, I think you got to trust the process and manage your stakeholders. So sort out your methodology and agree with everyone that this is how we will be allocating costs. So these are the methodologies we'll use, and the best data we have available. And once everyone's agreed on that, then we collectively have to trust the answer, whatever it is, rightly or wrongly. And then, we can iterate that as we go along through, periodically or per cycle. And, this is where, again, you need some good enablers, such as your solution, to really help this process, because these things are very iterative, and if you're constantly changing allocation methods or recharge mechanisms, you need to be able to do that in a very agile way.
Yeah. Hey, and talking about IT costing is a little bit like counterintuitive, in a sense that it's just the business of IT is not in isolation. The business of IT is, and rightly so, over time, a much bigger part of the companies than it used to be in the older days. But nowadays, it's still not in isolation. Mm-hmm. So once you have that price per application or price per, workplace or things like that, how would you integrate that in the complete cost situation of a company? Because it's just one part. I mean, there's also direct cost. There is back office staff, front office staff, things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's a much bigger conversation. But we get different types of cost models. So actually, you mentioned FinOps at the start of this conversation, and FinOps just looks at cloud costs, not even You
can even go more niche. Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Not even. Yeah, so FinOps is a pure bottom-up view, which is based on real-time data, and so it's a totally different objective. Whereas ITFM, looks at the total IT budget, the sort of personnel costs, which is roughly about 35%, of your IT organization. So still a big part that you need to look at. But to answer your question, yes, you have to link IT with the wider shared service picture. And what we see increasingly is, especially organizations that have a chief shared service officer, you need to build a cost model for finance, for HR, for procurement, for all the shared services, because it's the same mechanism. You still have to charge back.
Yeah, and even if you are at the shared service center, you haven't come to a cost price per mortgage or per savings account yet.
Yeah.
Because you still have, the front office guys, those are not in the shared service center. Absolutely. Your different branches, if you still work with branches, they are not in the shared service cost. So you have to integrate all those costs that you get out of your IT model. You have to integrate that all into your complete cost model element.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. As a sort of closure question, we have seen TBM taking a big rise over the time, and we are really happy to ride that wave as well. So we're very happy on that. How do you see this developing over the future?
Yeah, I think it's definitely going to grow more and more. If you look at just cloud spend by itself, it was something like 10% of total IT spend over the last so 5 years ago. Now it's around 18%. So I think it's just going to grow. And as that's just cloud spend as a percentage of the overall pie. So as that variable element grows, then there's going to be a bigger need to understand cost transparency. So it's only going to grow. And I think it's never too late to start the journey. And another misconception is being totally ready. You don't have to have all the data or all the information ready. You just got to have the objective and the initiative, and you can start the journey.
Perfect. Well, thanks a lot. We tried to keep it a little bit around the half-hour mark. I hope we've made it. Yeah. And any questions, as always, you can just put them on the chat, or otherwise you can just contact us later. Whatever subject comes next, we will announce that in due course, and we'll have another expert probably on the call, on the webinar to help us out. Thank you very much for listening this time, and I thank you very much, Mahmoud, for joining us today, and I hope to see you guys next time.